Eva Braun may have committed suicide together with Adolf Hitler in 1945, but did you know that after World War II, the fate of her family was shrouded in secrecy, fear, and even tragedy? While Eva herself died in Hitler's bunker, her parents, sisters, and relatives were left behind to deal with the unimaginable consequences of being related to the Führer's mistress. What really happened to them, and how did they survive the fall of Nazi Germany? Let's start with the parents, Friedrich and Franziska Braun. Friedrich, known as Fritz, was a teacher and civil servant before the war. He had never been a prominent political figure. He wasn't a Nazi leader or propagandist. He was, in many ways, a typical Bavarian middle-class father, but none of that mattered anymore. To the world, he was the father of Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, and for a single day, his wife. After the fall of the Reich, both Fritz and Franziska were interrogated by Allied authorities. Imagine the scene, the devastated parents of Hitler's mistress being questioned about their loyalties, their knowledge, their beliefs. Did they know about the Holocaust? Did they approve of Hitler? Did they benefit from their daughter's connection to the most powerful man in Germany? From what records we have, neither Fritz nor Franziska were ever prosecuted. The Allies determined they were ordinary people swept up in extraordinary circumstances. But innocence in a court of law doesn't erase suspicion in the public eye. They lived with shame, whispers, and the heavy burden of their daughter's choices. Fritz Braun lived quietly until his death in 1964. Franziska survived until 1976, long enough to witness Germany's transformation into a divided Cold War state. Both tried to retreat into obscurity, but the shadow of Eva was never far away. For them, life after 1945 was not about rebuilding, but about hiding. Now let's turn to Eva's sisters, Ilse and Gretl. Their lives show just how different the fates of siblings can be. Ilse Braun, the eldest, had always been the quiet one. She was not politically active, and unlike Eva, she had no direct ties to Hitler. She managed to live out the war years relatively unnoticed. After 1945, she chose anonymity as her survival strategy. Ilse never married. She lived a quiet, almost invisible life, dying in 1979. Some might call that tragic, but perhaps it was also a kind of freedom. She erased herself from the story, slipping through the cracks of history. Gretl Braun, however, took a very different path. She had been far more entangled with the Nazi elite. In 1944, she married Hermann Fegelein, an SS officer who held the crucial position of Himmler's liaison to Hitler. Fegelein was not just a minor figure, he was at the very core of the Nazi hierarchy. He had direct access to Hitler, and he married into the Braun family at the height of Nazi power. But Gretl's rise into the inner circle ended in catastrophe. As Berlin fell in April 1945, Fegelein was accused of desertion and treason. Caught trying to flee, he was dragged back to the bunker. Hitler, furious and paranoid, ordered his execution. Fegelein was shot in the garden of the Reich Chancellery just days before the war ended. In May 1945, just days after Eva and Hitler committed suicide, Gretl gave birth to a daughter. She named her Eva Barbara in honor of her sister. Think about the situation. In a Germany of rubble and ruin, a child was born into one of the most stigmatized families imaginable, the niece of Hitler's mistress and the daughter of a disgraced SS officer. For Gretl, life after the war was defined by disgrace. She had lost her husband to Hitler's wrath, lost her sister to suicide in the bunker, and inherited the stigma of being part of Hitler's extended family. She remarried in 1954 to a businessman named Kurt Berlinghoff and tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy, but the Braun name was always a scar. Gretl lived until 1987, her life marked by loss, scandal, and survival in silence. Her daughter, Eva Barbara Fegelein, grew up in post-war Germany, carrying a name that was more curse than blessing. Imagine being a child in school, your mother, the sister of Eva Braun, your father, an executed SS officer. No matter how much she may have wanted a normal life, the past was always present. She tried to live as an ordinary young woman in the 1960s, but the weight of history was relentless. In 1971, at the age of just 25, she took her own life. A tragic end that symbolized the generational curse of the Nazi past. She had no role in the crimes of the Third Reich, no choice in her family ties, but she paid the ultimate price for a legacy she could not escape. This was perhaps the darkest turn in the Braun family's story. The death of Eva Barbara showed that the shadow of Hitler's regime extended far beyond 1945 into the lives of those born after the war. The sins of the past rippled forward, crushing even the innocent. Returning to Ilse Braun, her life seems almost ghostly compared to her sister's. She left little behind for historians to study, perhaps intentionally. While Gretel's life was entangled with scandal, Ilse's was one of quiet disappearance. Some have speculated she chose obscurity as a form of survival. Better to vanish than to be forever branded the sister of Hitler's mistress. Her death in 1979 closed the book on her story, a story defined more by what we don't know than what we do. The extended family of Eva Braun, cousins, distant relatives, also carried the stigma. Some were interrogated, some tried to change their names, others blended back into society as best they could, but the closer they were to Eva, the harder it was to escape suspicion. In post-war Germany, people wanted to know who had supported the Nazis, who had benefited, who had known the truth. For the Braun family, silence was often their only defense. And that brings us to the most haunting moment of their story, not the interrogations, not even the execution of Hermann Fegelein, but the tragic suicide of Eva Barbara. She represented a generation born into guilt they did not choose. She was a child of ruins, carrying the legacy of Hitler's mistress as her aunt and an executed SS officer as her father. Her death in 1971 was more than a personal tragedy. It was a symbol of how the past lingered like a poison long after the war had ended. It proved that for families like the Brauns, the war never truly ended. It lived on in shame, suspicion, and trauma. So, what happened to Eva Braun's family after World War II? Her parents faded into obscurity, living out their days under the weight of association. Her sister Ilse lived quietly, trying to vanish from history. Her sister Gretl endured disgrace, remarried, but could never escape the past. Her brother-in-law Hermann Fegelein was executed by the Nazis themselves in the bunker, and her niece, Eva Barbara, ended her own life, unable to bear the legacy of her family. The fate of the Braun family is a reminder that history does not simply end when the guns fall silent. For those tied to the Nazi elite, the end of the war was only the beginning of another kind of suffering. Their story reflects a broader truth. For millions of families in post-war Germany, rebuilding life meant facing not only rubble and hunger, but also the haunting question of guilt, whether by action or by association. The Braun family's story may seem unique because of their connection to Hitler, but in reality, it mirrors the struggles of countless others. Families torn apart, reputations destroyed, generations burdened by the past. It's a human story of survival, shame, and tragedy in the long shadow of history. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Eva Braun's family deserve to live in obscurity, or do you see them more as tragic bystanders caught in the storm of history? Share your opinions in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into a little-known corner of World War II history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story.